case so well and might have said to her that that might have been your first speech, but after the quality you've just shown, make sure it's not your last.
Thank you.
To start the case now for the opposition, I'd like to call Hugh Whelan.
So, good evening. Oh, sorry.
To Nathan's rights as well. The same criteria applies to those. If you wish to waive them, you'll be greeted to them.
I'll waive them. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I guess I'd like to start by saying that I'm not really sure how I ended up here. I'm not involved in the Students' Union in any formal capacity. To be honest, I'm the furthest thing from an SU hack. I agree with Chloe. I think the President's backtracking on the proposed BDS movement was a low move, and the proposed affordable student accommodation that costs over €900 a month is ridiculous. As a body, the SU certainly is not perfect. But the proposition tonight of supporting the right to leave the SU is a step in a completely wrong direction. If anything, this proposal were carried through, it would do infinitely more harm than good. And I guess that's what I'm here to talk about tonight, that those supporting this motion are grossly disregarding the implications that optional membership of the SU would have. The fact of the matter is that the proposed motion is inherently classist. For very many students, the SU offers supports that are essential for their survival and continued attendance of the student in Trinity. There are some people, for example, who aren't lucky enough to live in Dublin and who need assistance getting accommodation, jobs and so on. There are LGBTQ persons who need assistance and support and who can meet with the SU's dedicated officer. There are students who are not privileged, who deal with extreme financial difficulty and who desperately need the support of the SU and its financial aid. And there are students who encounter difficulties with mental health, sexuality and so on, who rely on the support of the welfare officer. Is it fair to disregard these students? No, thank you. You may be lucky enough not to rely on the supports of the SU, but maybe your best friend does, or your lab partner. And if this motion were passed, the supports provided by the SU for your fellow students would be negatively affected to a vast extent. Without the student contribution funds, funding would decrease dramatically for these well-needed services, and you could have students who are simply not able to continue studying Trinity, no thank you, or who wouldn't be able to come in the first place because of the lack of SU supports. So I think it's incredibly selfish of the proposition to stand up and call the Students' Union ineffective or useless when it's clear that it's actually incredibly necessary for a large number of students. By extension, it's also completely reasonable that we pay a student contribution in the first place. I'm sure proposition may argue that one shouldn't have to pay to be a member of a union you don't want to be in. But again, that's an incredibly selfish thing to say. Your college experience runs smoothly on a day-to-day basis because of the supports offered and work done by the SU. As I explained, no thank you, no thank you. As I explained, if membership becomes voluntary and supports become diminished, you'd have a large number of unhappy and disaffected students. Even if you can exist in your privileged student life without SU support, your fellow students cannot. And it's completely fair and reasonable that we all contribute towards the entire student collective being able to cope with and get through college life. I think this privilege argument is one that's completely overlooked because the proposition are so set on talking about their own individual right and freedom of association that they're failing to think about how their actions may affect others. I guarantee you that the proposition will spend the evening, no thank you, largely discussing rights, as Chloe has already done, and ignoring the human aspect of this debate. The tired argument will be raised again and again, comparing the SU to a trade union and saying that it's unconstitutional to force people to be a member of a union. The thing is that there's nothing forced about coming to Trinity. We all choose to come here, and it's part and parcel of choosing to be a student here is the SU and everything it offers. I think the word union confuses people, because the reality is that the SU is so much more than a union that protects students' rights. As explained, it offers an incredible amount of supports, from financial to counselling to cater for different students' needs. The SU runs Trinity Ball, Freshers Week, all the ENTS events throughout the year. It runs Rainbow Week, Women's Week, does a huge amount to promote rights in general, provides the class rep system, which means that academic side of things runs mostly smoothly. They even have special offers on sandwiches in the SU cafe. In short, the SU and its work makes up a huge part of student life, and it's absolutely not comparable to a simple union, as the proposition will say. Proposition will also, and have already, point to places like the UK and New Zealand and say, if they have optional SU membership, then why shouldn't we? The thing is that this motion situates our debate in an Irish context. We live in an entirely different country with different laws, politics and culture to the rest of the world, and funding structures are different, student accommodation, and so on and so on. Essentially, it's a moot argument to compare the SU to those elsewhere. To give an example of the work done by the SU here, the Students' Union role in campaigning for marriage equality in 2015 was absolutely pivotal to the success of the National Yes campaign. This was an instance in which students' unions across Ireland played a huge role in registering voters and promoting the yes vote. It was an issue specific to Ireland, and the SU played a huge role in its success. But this raises another important aspect to our debate tonight, and that's the question of SU politics. Those arguing for the right to leave the SU state that they feel the Students' Union has become too political, or that they feel misrepresented by some of the stances taken by the SU, and therefore don't want to associate with it. Now, note the emphasis on some. Largely speaking, students seem to be happy with the stances taken by the SU. Would anyone say, for example, that the SU should not have taken a stance on marriage equality? Surely not. Should we have Ironmark off our campus and a plastic-free campus? Yeah, sure. I'm sure Proposition would agree that these are reasonable, non-controversial political stances to take. So, essentially what Proposition are saying is, okay, we like some of the non-controversial stances, we don't mind them, it's just certain controversial ones. The word, ladies and gentlemen, which the entire SU Out movement fails to mention is repeal. It's the elephant in the room. The fact of the matter is that we are debating this motion on the right to leave the SU tonight because of the SU Opt-out project which launched last term. Now, it's important that we recognise that it's absolutely no coincidence that this movement has sprung up in Trinity and other colleges in the same year as the repeal referendum is due to take place. Why has SU membership never been questioned until now? Because by and large, people were satisfied with the non-controversial stances that the SU takes. Years ago, no one questioned the anti-apartheid campaign. In 2015, no one questioned when we campaigned to vote yes for marriage equality. But certain anti-choice persons feel very strongly that the stance in favour of the repeal campaign taken by TCD-SU does not represent their views. And so they've begun work on this opt-out of the SU movement. Why? Because in a very real sense it encourages divisiveness by distracting the student body with this question of SU membership. The repeal campaign is entering into a crucial stage. We've about 6 months until the referendum, and yet here we are discussing an entirely unrelated issue. Now, of course, don't take this as a gross generalisation. There are people who are pro-choice but who may still be interested in the idea of optional SU membership. And furthermore, I can completely understand why anti-choice persons feel misrepresented by the repeal stance. But the fact is that by majority vote, our student body has voted to support repealing the 8th. Every single student has a say, and the elected class reps and majority rule system means that in the fairest way possible, the students' views are represented. We're talking tonight about the minority of people for whom the democratic process has failed and who feel that views aren't being represented. I suggest these people to use the tools they have at hand. To simply act like a child, throwing their rattle out of the pram when they don't get their way, is an extremely immature and it won't change anything for the better. I'll conclude by saying to the proposition, check your privilege. Consider the impact consider the impact of what optional membership entails. Consider perhaps using the tools of the SU to enact change. And in the meantime, myself and the majority of the student body, as reflected in the vote, will continue to work on important things like repealing the 8th. Thank you.
Thank you, very well done. Similar advice to what I gave to the person who went before you. Thank you for setting out that case so strongly and so well. Always good when anyone gives a speech to draw a reaction from the crowd and let there be more of it. So to continue the case now for the proposition, I'd like to call on James Martin.
I will waive my maiden right, yeah.
They were actually accepting 4 speeches for this debate, so if anybody would like to speak for either the proposition or the opposition, they just write their name on a page and hand it up to the desk. Those speeches are just 1 minute in length, the person asking that was so, you're waiving your maiden
I will waive it, yeah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Just a few points of debate. The gentleman before me accused us of being divisive, and I find this to be an awfully bizarre point. I mean, we live in a free society. Isn't debate what we're about? Like, should we just not have the conversation? And then he mentioned that we were not focusing enough on the class issue, which I found strange, because my friend here had a breakdown of Student Union's budget, and even without our contributions, they still have about €1 million. So they can fund all of their beneficial activities perfectly fine without our contributions. So the point seems to be moot as far as I'm concerned. And with all due respect, I feel as if we are debating a foregone conclusion. On the right of freedom of association is explicitly protected in the Irish Constitution, and I know they might find it slightly novel, but the Irish Constitution does outrank the FU's Constitution just slightly. Two landmark legal cases, Educational Company v. Fitzpatrick and National Union of Railway Workers v. Sullivan, ruled very clearly that not only do we have a right to leave a union, you cannot force us to be in a union. It is blatantly unconstitutional. So I would recommend the next time the Student Union writes up their constitution, they pay slightly more attention to the laws in place. In fact, the only way the opposition can actively argue this motion is by blatantly ignoring the rule of law. I mean, what can they do? They cannot legally force us to be in a union when the courts have ruled that they cannot do so. And I'm glad you brought up the abortion point, actually, because I did write a bit about that. Yeah, a lot of people in the opt-out campaign are, in fact, pro-life, and Union is obviously pro-choice, except on the topic of membership, but that's a different issue. And I'm aware of the fact that most people in here are probably pro-choice. I myself am pro-choice, but I would never dream of forcing someone to violate their conscience by forcing them into a union which takes up money to promote a cause that they are fundamentally morally opposed to. And the idea that you want to do that is, in my opinion, entirely grotesque and indefensible. But I would invite everyone present here who is pro-choice, like myself, to consider the following situation. Imagine you were in a students' union that was overwhelmingly pro-life.
On that point.
No, 1 second. I'll take you in a moment. But you were in a union that was overwhelmingly pro-life. How would you feel comfortable if your fees were taken up to promote a pro-life cause? Would you want to be able to leave? Would you?
I just think that's a moot point, to be honest,
Oh,
because
is it?
there's no possible way that we would have a pro-life majority here, because that's just not.
No. This isn't like an imaginary college in like Galway or something. Like, it's just a hypothetical. Like, there isn't actually a university that does it, but if there were, would you want the right to? Anyway, the point is generalizable to all moral objections. I mean, do we not have the right to exercise our freedom of conscience? Which is a rhetorical question. It is also valuable to note the definition of a union. I mean, just because it's a student union. It's a group of voluntarily associated individuals campaigning to promote their common rights. And that can be anyone from bankers to fox hunters. But the point being, the key word is voluntary. Without it being voluntary, you can't meaningfully define yourself as being a union. You're coercing people to join a cause. And on what grounds? Like, on what legitimate grounds can you force somebody into your club? I mean, you do not have the power of a sovereign nation state. I mean, they act like they do, but they certainly do not. A certain Trinity newspaper that I don't read, but I'm told about, said that we were anti-democratic. No, we're not anti-democratic. We just don't want to be forced into a union that we don't have any business in. No, as in, the SU has a right to vote on controversial social stances like Israel or repealing the like, that is your right, and you have the right to form a union, and I will defend your right to form a union, but I will not defend your right to take away someone else's right. I mean, you can't frame it in terms of, you mean you have to argue for, you have the right to force us into a union, and you cannot frame that as a right because it violates someone else's right, which is sort of like a basic axiom of human rights. Any POIs? I really, yeah, go on.
So, what would you say? Like, so coming to Trinity is optional. There's no.
Oh yeah, that's a fallacy. That's a fallacy. It isn't. We are not implicitly consenting to being in a union merely because we are students. I mean, that'd be like saying, "Oh, you're a plumber, and you have to join a plumbers union." You don't. You can. Yeah. Hey.
You have to sign up to terms and agreements, contract to register to a student group. So
Here.
No. Because legally, I'm no scholar of the law. But I checked with a friend of mine, and any part you can't sign away. I'll take you in a second. You can't legally sign away a right. So even if I would sign a piece of paper saying I have to join your union, that would be invalid on the grounds that it is not legally binding, but it's unconstitutional. It'd be like you signing a piece of paper saying what's his name? I don't know. Anyway, if you sign a piece of paper saying Paul, if Paul were to sign a piece of paper saying I hereby relinquish my right to free speech, well, it's not a legally binding contract on the fact that it's illegal. Sorry, you give your point? Oh, the bell. Anyway, I urge you all to propose the motion. Thank you very much.
James, thank you very much indeed for a speech full of interesting points and a model of how to compose yourself when your train of thought goes. And I would say to everyone to just observe that. I mean, a lot of people do lose their train of thought, and I thought you handled that extremely well.
I know, so did I.
And modestly too. Now, I'd like to invite the second speaker for the opposition to continue that case, please, Anya Curry. Or Curry, forgive me if I got that wrong.
No one knows how to say it. It's a medical mystery. Okay. All right. So I have two main points to bring you guys this evening. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why leaving the student union won't really benefit anyone. And secondly, why students leaving is actually actively harmful. But first, I just want to talk about how there are better ways to fix the problems of the SU than just flat out leaving. And if you don't like the political stance of the student union that they're taking, or you're unhappy with how unaccountable the officers are, which are totally fair stances to take, then do something about it. Express your views, be loud, oppose them, get involved. By speaking up and showing them your dissatisfaction with the status quo, you can make a change. It's much easier to fix a system from within it than from outside. All of the problems of that the opposition have can be fixed without leaving the student union, by reforming it instead. But we can't reform the SU without an increase in involvement and an increase in the number of voices speaking out against how it's run today. So now, on to my first point. Why doesn't leaving the student union benefit anyone? No one's forced to engage with the student union, okay? And if you don't let it, it won't, just wait, it won't affect your life in any way. I mean, I don't really notice the student union doing anything to me in my day-to-day life. Like, being a member doesn't mean anything, really. It's purely symbolic.
Point of information.
I'll take Mihal because he's my fave.
Just because the SU is ineffective, doesn't that not remove your constitutional right to disassociate?
I mean, Hugh made a really good point about it, and you phrased it way better than I can, so just listen to what he said. But anyway, a huge number of students aren't involved in the student union while still technically being members. You don't have to officially leave the student union to not be a part of it. Much like the SU, the HIST technically has much more members than are actively involved. I mean, look around, okay, because apparently the HIST has 10,000 members, and I don't think there's 10,000 people in this room. And, those other 9,000 inactive members aren't really negatively affected by having this membership to the HIST. I mean, I am, but that's a different story. Also, the way Trinity manages its funds means it's not likely that anyone is going to get back the few euro that goes towards the student union. Leaving the student union doesn't provide any benefit and would be purely symbolic. It only costs €8 a year to be a part of the SU. And when you think about the monetary value of the amount of donuts and pizza that they give out during Freshers' Week, I think we can more than make that back. But anyway, on to my second point. Leaving the student union will harm the SU and make it less able to act on behalf of its remaining members. With less support for the student union, It can't provide vital services like the education officer, who works to get extensions for students who are unable to complete assignments or essays or exams for medical reasons. These vulnerable students will be among the most affected if the power of the SU diminishes. They also provide public goods. The service, oh, hang on 1 second. Opposition have talked about the shortcomings of the SU of dealing with student issues, or their focus on irrelevant issues. But without the support of all the student body, it will have less ability to deal with any issues at all. Even if you think its priorities are less important than what it should be prioritising, they're better than prioritising nothing. But anyway, they also provide public goods. The services provided by the student union are so interwoven into student life that it's impossible to avoid availing of them. There will be no real way to police whether non-SU members are using them. And is it fair, no, if people not in the student union get to use their facilities? Chloe mentioned that the SU should put, my writing's so small, put more effort into making sure only its members can use its services. But that's just a ridiculous waste of resources and funds that could go into student issues instead. The student union provides many amazing facilities to students. The number of students registered to vote has increased because of SU campaigns. They provide academic and financial aid to students, and they raise awareness of mental health and disability and LGBT issues. From water fountains in the Hamilton to the Trinity Ball to bringing us the cool word fresh, we greatly benefit from the student union. Opposition, no, I already said that. Anyway, do I have any points of information? Because I don't have anything to say. Oh no.
The point you said that we only pay €8 to the SU, that
Yeah.
€8 goes to the USI. It's more like €32 or €34 that we pay to the SU.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, in comparison to the amount of facilities that they give us, I think that that's completely fair. I think that the amount of student places that we have to stay, like, compared to the amount we might have to pay to, like, be in a cafe or something gross. It's fair enough that we have our student spaces. Yeah, Michal.
A lot of different organisations also provide good services, so FLAC, Amnesty, should their membership also be mandatory?
I mean, no, because we're not studying in Amnesty, we're studying in Trinity. No, sorry.
Hello?
I'm not going to take anyone from here. I'll take pretty much anywhere else. Yeah, go on.
I actually have a point in your favour. I just took some of it. Constitutions all over the world guarantee what I consider to be ridiculous things. And I don't understand why it's written somewhere as a valid argument.
Yes.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Luke. That was a very good point, and I'm going to pretend that I thought of that. He's also the one that told me that we only pay €8 to the student union, so I guess we'll blame that on him. Anyway, I don't know if Atan is actually here, but I put my concluding sentence in for her. We should unite under a union, as the island of Ireland should unite together as one. I beg you to oppose.
Thank you, Anya, for that fine speech, and I congratulate you there on that lovely rhetorical conclusion and the subtle way you jumped on the guy who made a point in your favour. So it's my pleasure now to call upon Donncha Curran to continue the debate.
Donncha, since this is also your first time speaking in the chamber, you are entitled to what's called making rights. I'm sure you know by now what those rights entail.
I'll take the round of applause. Timekeepers, adjudicators, members of the opposition, members of the proposition, members of the HIST, remaining members of the FIL. Ladies and gentlemen, today's debate is not about whether the SU is good or bad. Now, you may believe the SU is completely useless, they've never done a good thing in their life. You may believe they are flawless gods among men, incapable of mistakes. You may believe anything in between. But ladies and gentlemen, it is completely irrelevant. Today's debate is about the fundamental question of the individual liberty we award to students and whether or not we should extend that individual liberty to leaving the union. It is my belief and the belief of the proposition that we absolutely should extend that liberty to leaving the union, and it is our belief that that is not only better for the students who choose to leave, it will ultimately be better for the students that choose to remain and the union as a whole.
I'll be bringing 2 points to today's debate to talk about this. I'll be talking about how it will lead to increased accountability for the student union, and how we can already see how we can achieve greater results through the examples given to us by other nations. Just a couple of quick points of rebuttal. There's been the case made that, well, we need sort of diversity of voices within the union to reform the union from within if there are flaws, etc., etc. A union by its very nature is meant to be united. They are meant to be a group of like-minded people working towards a common goal. A union is not meant to be disunited. If you do not conform to the goals of the union, you should not be part of the union. Also this case of... No, thank you. Also this case of, well, just the brief point that was made earlier that, well, the Constitution is just something that's written somewhere. It's very true, but like the law is also just something that's written somewhere. Some things that are written down are kind of important and should ultimately be adhered to. Anyway, without further ado, I'll dive into my first point, which is that this will deliver increased accountability to the union. At the moment, ladies and gentlemen, we are customers who cannot withdraw our business. We put the money in and we just have to accept what is given to us. Whether that is, it may be against our principles, or we may simply think it is not worth our money, but that should ultimately be our choice, ladies and gentlemen. And there is a fundamental problem with this. As we can not withdraw our business, there's a fundamental lack of accountability. They know we cannot withdraw our business without leaving Trinity College. They know there will always be demand for places within this college, and therefore there will always be money there. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a major problem. People need motivation and a certain amount of pressure to perform at their peak, to do the best job they possibly can. With a lack of accountability, there is no pressure. Now, this can ultimately lead to lethargy. It can ultimately lead to mistakes being made as people do not take as much care as they could. This can be seen, for example, with the tremendous debt the SU has racked up over the years. This is an example of irresponsible decision-making that may not be present were there a greater level of accountability. Yes?
On the point of accountability, you only need 2 student class reps or 10 students to bring something to council. A simple majority of council can impeach any part-time officer, and any majority of the electorate can impeach an officer during their term. And there's the Oversight Commission, and also the deficit is about 1%, it's not that big. There is accountability, does that not count?
Yes. There is accountability for individuals, yes, but as for the union as a whole, from the student body, there is not a level of accountability. And moreover, if someone is generally liked among the class rep, liked among the union, they may not receive sort of the punishment they were due for doing a bad job, regardless of if they do such a bad job. Now, thank you. Now, if we allow this to take place, this opt-out option, it eliminates this problem with accountability. The SU must now provide value for money. They must give students the best possible deal, or those students will simply leave. Now, by giving students this option to leave, we will push the student union to give the best possible deal to students. Will there always be a small number who will leave regardless? Yes, of course there will. But the better job the union does, the more people that will choose to stay. They want to keep the money coming in, and they will be forced to please the students. They can't just coast on their laurels. Increased accountability leads to a better union. We've already talked about why this is better for the people who want to leave, but a better union is but increased accountability leads to a better union for those who want to stay, and it leads to a stronger Trinity College overall for all of us. And now on to my second point, which is that the current format is essentially very restrictive, and we can already see how we can achieve success. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as things currently stand, none of the major colleges in Ireland have an opt-out option. All of them force you, if you wish to attend their institution, to be part of a union. Therefore, if you don't wish to join a student union, if you wish to attend third level education, your only choices are to join a student union or go abroad. Going abroad is obviously not an option for a large number of people for a large number of reasons. Therefore, you have absolutely no choice but to join a student union. We believe this is an unfair system. However, this doesn't have to be it. There is sort of this attitude of, well, that's just the way it is, that's the way it has to be. But ladies and gentlemen, that does not have to be the way it be. And Trinity can help change this. Now, why doesn't it have to be the way it be? Now, we've covered already why it shouldn't have to be this way, but what we have not covered so far in this debate, or at least we've covered it to some extent, Chloe covered it to some extent, that we have examples of other situations, of other nations that have instituted this. The UK have an opt-out option, Australia has an opt-out option, New Zealand has an opt-out option. Now, the Op responded to this by saying in vague terms, well, Ireland is different and it couldn't really work in Ireland. They never provided any practical reasons it couldn't work in Ireland, because simply put, there isn't any practical reasons it couldn't work in Ireland. There is nothing to stop it working here as it worked there. Now, what we've seen, now what have been the results? Now, what have been the results in those countries where it has been tried? It has not led to the mass exodus that people worry about. Therefore, it has not led to a dramatic drop in the money coming in for the universities and the money they can provide. The universities actually have incredibly strong student unions in these countries. I believe partly because of I believe that is in large part because of the accountability and the opt-out option. They have very strong student unions. That means the student unions remain strong, they remain influential, and in addition to that, students are not compelled to do anything they do not want to do. They're not compelled to be part of a group they do not want to be a part of, and they are not compelled to go against their own moral conscience in many instances. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the best of both worlds. They have it in other nations. There's no reason we can't have it here. I've brought 2 points to this debate today. I have talked about how it leads to increased accountability for the student union, and how we already have a model for how this can work abroad. Ladies and gentlemen, I beg you to propose.
Thank you very much for supposing please laying out so many important points there in your speech. It's my pleasure now to call upon to continue the opposition case the Record Secretary Catherine Kelly.
I'm afraid I'm going to be quite obnoxious and take a moment to arrange my papers because there's a lot of it. So before I kind of begin my speech properly, I thought I'd begin with kind of an addition to Luke's very strange non-POI POI back there, and add that Paul actually told me a few weeks ago that apparently, I can't remember if this is still true, which is possibly worrying, seeing as I'm supposedly supposed to know the laws of this society, but apparently people actually have to refer to me as Madam Record Secretary all of the time, and if you ever refer to me by my name, you will be fined within the laws of the HIST. So I just, I do think we can ignore some laws. I do think they're a bit silly. I wouldn't really like everyone to call me Madam Record Secretary all the time, it gets a bit much. But sure, look. Anyhow, now into what I actually had written on a piece of paper. So, if tomorrow morning the grand vision of the soup was realised, and the SU was, let's say, smashed to the ground, I realise I'm being a bit ungenerous here, but it's smashed to the ground, right? We'd be without sexual health and consent education, we'd be without an academic officer to get you extensions when you badly need them, and we would be without a spaces and facilities organisation to organise space or whatever they do. And that would be pretty unfortunate. I mean, pretty soon, I kind of feel like you'd actually need and want many of those essential services back. And I mean, that might even be like a bit too much to ask like one person to organise. So quickly you'd need like a group of people to organise all of those things. Let's call it a student committee, anyway. But that thing would very, very closely resemble a students' union. I think it is absolutely ludicrous to suggest that the students' union isn't something that we need and isn't something that everyone should be a part of. Of course, I know the proposition aren't asking us to smash the whole union. They'd just like to leave but retain all the benefits that they can get from it, essentially. So, essentially, I'm going to make two main arguments tonight. I think addressing the main arguments of soup. So I'm going to address the point that some students will never use students' union services. And secondly, I'm going to talk about the idea that the SU functions like a political party. Because essentially I feel that I don't think I'm being too ungenerous in saying that those are the main complaints. So firstly, I think Chloe tells us that like people are clever and they know what they're, signing out of when they opt out of the Students' Union. People are not clever, and people do not know what they are opting out of when they opt out of the Students' Union. I think the truth is, we can all say, oh, I won't need student union services. And we say that with relative confidence. But you cannot completely know that. To be honest, I could have told you a few weeks ago that I wouldn't need Students' Union